Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. All right, really quickly, before we get to where Aaron was right, where Aaron was wrong, do want to talk about one other topic that, as I said off the top, I kind of glossed over it on Monday's episode, but it's really kind of a big, important topic the more that you break it down, and that is the news that Wisconsin quarterback, freshman quarterback, was awesome in their debut. His name is Graham Mertz, that he has potentially tested positive for COVID. Graham Mertz, M-E-R-T-Z. Has potentially tested positive for COVID, and pending a second test, he might be out for a while. And so I bring this up not because I think this is a Wisconsin football topic that we need to get into. I'm not going to bore you with 20 minutes of Wisconsin football talk, although I will say the kid was really good, like I said, in his debut. 20 of 21 passing, 5 touchdown passes. Yes, I bet against Wisconsin last week. Yes, I got screwed. But I only bring it up to say the kid was really, really, really good. But I bring it up because I think it really hits on something that Cole Kublik and I talked about on the show late last week, if you listen to Thursday's episode, and that is the Big Ten's absurd, crazy testing policies, because Graham Mertz will get a second test, and if that comes back positive, he is looking at sitting out for 21 days until he is allowed to play again. 21 full days until he would be allowed to play. And he would be missing some of Wisconsin's most important games, including this weekend at Nebraska. Next weekend they play Purdue, and then the following weekend they play Michigan, which is frankly probably the toughest game on their schedule this season. And so as I sit back and talk about this and think about this, to me, it's not so much about Graham Mertz specifically, and that is a big story. Don't get me wrong. Wisconsin's probably the best team in the Big Ten West, maybe the best team to compete with Ohio State in the Big Ten in general. But to me, it's not really a story about Graham Mertz. It's a story about the Big Ten. And to me, it's not only a story about the Big Ten, but it really goes back to the beginning of all of this COVID hysteria dating back to August. If you remember, you guys know I was pretty consistent on where my stance was back in August. I want everybody to be safe. I want everybody to be healthy. I don't want anybody to be at risk. But I obviously thought that the Big Ten was making a mistake in canceling the season when they did, and I was obviously proven right. And my stance essentially since then has very simply been this. When the Big Ten canceled, I didn't believe that they actually had the best interests of their kids at heart. I don't believe that they had so much more data and information that nobody else had that led them to make that decision. I think they wanted to be first. I think they believed everybody would follow. And I think that they thought that they would look like the heroes because they took COVID-19 so much more seriously than everybody else. And again, to be abundantly clear, I'm not taking this virus lightly. I'm not saying it isn't serious. I'm not saying that people have not died from this virus. I'm not saying that maybe some of you know people who have been infected by it or you yourselves have been infected by it. But what I am saying is I do believe that all of the Big Ten's decisions have not been rooted in what's best for the athletes, but instead what looks best from a PR perspective. And so even when they decided to come back, I thought they were crazy, and I thought they were once again trying to outsmart the room, trying to show everybody how much they cared, that we care so much more about COVID than everybody else. And I truly believe that in that moment, because when you saw their testing protocols and their procedures, there was one thing that jumped out specifically. And that was that any player that tested positive had to sit out for 21 days for 3 weeks before they were readministered. And obviously, if you think about it, first of all, we have enough data at this point, right? We want to be safe. We want to be healthy. But you can get it in out of your system in 2 weeks. That's one. So you're going above and beyond the third week. But then on top of it, what ends up happening is what Cole Kublik talked about on the show last week, is that we have seen outbreaks on some of these college campuses. And what Cole brought up was, if what was going on at Florida right now happened in the Big Ten, basically Florida's season would be done. If what happened at Baylor or Virginia Tech happened in the Big Ten, whoever was the team that was in the middle of this, their season would be done. And I think this is the first time that people are kind of waking up, rubbing their eyes and saying, oh my God, this policy is kind of crazy. Because it's one thing to keep players safe, and it's one thing to want what's best for the players, but you can also go above and beyond. And I think when you see the 21-day thing, it sounds crazy, but until somebody actually tests positive and you actually are looking at 3 straight weeks without seeing them play, you start to realize, oh my God, this could have huge, massive implications on the Big Ten season. It obviously starts at Wisconsin. It obviously starts with Graham Mertz, who might be out for the next 3 weeks, and it might really impact Wisconsin's season. But to take it a step further, what happens if, God forbid, Wisconsin as a team has a breakout and is not able to field a team? Well, we've seen across college football, a game has been postponed, a game has been moved, a game has been canceled. In the Big Ten, none of that is in play, though, because while Florida has an outbreak, there's enough time built into the Big Ten schedule, SEC schedule, where you can add a game at the end of the season. There's enough time where if they test positive, they can be back in 2 weeks ready to play, like Florida, which had to sit out last week and is now back playing after a 2-week break. The Big Ten has none of that. They have stricter protocols with zero wiggle room if an outbreak occurs. And so to me, what's going to be absolutely fascinating is what happens, again, if, God forbid, a team has an outbreak within the team. Because you're not just talking about one position group or one player. You're talking about the whole team having to not only shut down, but shut down for 21 days. Essentially, a third of your season is over because of a certain number of players test positive. And it's not only testing positive. It's the contact tracing. It's who you were in contact with, who you're in the room with, all that kind of stuff. And that's something that we've seen a lot in college football this year. A lot of these times, a lot of these games that have been canceled, it's not because of positive tests. It's because of contact tracing. And so when I look at the Big Ten, first of all, I really hope I'm wrong on this, but somebody is going to come down with something as a team. Because, again, we've seen it at Baylor. We've seen it at Virginia Tech. We've seen it at Florida. This virus does not discriminate. And I'm not trying to be all, big and bold and crazy about it, but this virus doesn't discriminate. And it's going to happen somewhere, and it's going to rip through a locker room, and a team is going to lose a third of their season. And I think if you want to put aside the medical stuff and just talk about the football stuff, I think it's going to have a crazy ripple effect on the college football season. What happens if we have 1 or 2 of these outbreaks and all of a sudden Ohio State now goes from playing 9 games to playing 6 or 7? What happens if they themselves have an outbreak? Justin Fields has to miss 2 or 3 weeks, and it's clear they're the best team in college football, but they go 1-2 because he has to miss 2 games. I'm not hoping for any of this. I'm not rooting for any of this, but I am saying these are the realities that we are living in this crazy COVID world that we find ourselves in this situation. And the difference between the Big Ten and, say, the the Big 12 or the SEC or the ACC, there's no time to make those games up. And so what's going to be fascinating to me is what happens going forward. What if there's an outbreak at Ohio State? What if there's an outbreak with 1 or 2 of Ohio State's opponents and they only get to play 6 or 7 games? What happens if they blow everybody out with Justin Fields on the field, but he has to miss 2 or 3 games because, God forbid, he tests positive as well? And by the way, there's nothing wrong if he tests positive. It's part of the deal. It can happen. I just think it's fascinating. I don't think anybody really thought about it until the fact that Graham Mertz tested positive on Monday. And so it's fascinating, and so we'll see. Graham Mertz has a chance to take a second test. If it comes back negative, he's kind of in that Nick Saban holding pattern of seeing if it was a false positive or not. But I'm just telling you, man, it's going to wreak havoc because think about Ohio State. They miss 1 or 2 games. A 9-0 Ohio State feels a lot different than a 6-0 or 7-0 Ohio State, especially when you're comparing them with, say, a Georgia or a Florida that's been playing since July, that never took time off of practice, that never stopped playing. How do you take away a chance for a 9-1 or 9-2 Notre Dame team, a 9-1, a 9-2 Oklahoma team, which could play their way back into the mix, Oklahoma State, Miami? How do you take away opportunities from those teams? Cincinnati, who's undefeated, to put in an Ohio State who might only get 6 or 7 games in. So it's fascinating, and I think the story isn't Graham Mertz himself. I think it's the bigger Big Ten testing policy. I think it's the Big Ten's idea that they're so much smarter than everybody else, and they learn so much, and they're going to take it so much more seriously than everybody else. It's going to cost their teams, and it might cost themselves a spot in the playoff.